This program is presented and distributed by Keep the Faith on the web at www.keepthefaith.org.
Drama of Truth, with your host, Father Vincent Miceli of the Society of Jesus, and Dr. William Marra, Professor of Philosophy at Fordham University. Today's program, The Anatomy of Atheism.
Welcome to the Drama of Truth television program. This is the first in a series of half-hour discussions which will treat of the general subject, Adventures in Atheism. This particular program will focus in on the anatomy of atheism. Now we ask ourselves, why such a program? What is the wherefore and why of a program, Drama of Truth, in our day? Well, really, if we look at the situation that we're in today, we have an age of global political upheaval, religious convulsions, a sense of loss of truth. You have, for example, in the East, you have advancing militaristic atheism. In the West, you have a sort of a soft, disorganized atheism. And at the base of this confusion is man's loss of his care about his relationship to God. He seems to have forgotten that his most important relationship is his relationship to God, both by faith and by an act of a life of moral goodness. In fact, truth has been so downgraded that people feel that we ought to allow truth to be faded from the world, or really truth should not be handed on as an organized body of principles better developed organically to our posterity. So we're in this particular crisis today, which is religious, political, social, philosophical. Every department of man's life is affected by this. What would you think of that, Dr. Marra?
I was just wondering, when you said that we are in this crisis of truth and our age is not especially interested in truth, would you say scientific truth also shares that negative appraisal by our contemporaries?
No, I would think that, if anything, scientific truth is at the apex of its development. We live in a technocratic age in which science can practically do anything, get to the moon and whatnot, and give us the best machines for our convenience. But this is experimental truth. We seem to have equated all truth merely with experimental truth, and we have abandoned the transcendental truth, spiritual truth, which is metaphysical, beyond the physical aspects of reality and the cosmos. And this is our problem. We've put blinders on our vision, spiritual vision, so that we think that all truth is merely scientific, in the strict sense of the word, narrow sense of the word, scientific truth. The truths of the strict sciences like physics, chemistry, biology, and what have you.
And in a sense, there's no drama, really, with chemical truth or physical truth. It's interesting, it's important technologically speaking, but I think what breaks the world apart is precisely the challenges to truth of religion, ethics.
Yes, they give the meaning to man. The only drama you have in scientific truth is the possible making of mistakes in experiments which could lead to, shall we call, accidents in nature, in machines, in getting to the moon, being lost in space. But those are what we call physical tragedies. They're not the real tragedies of man's life, namely what happens in his soul, what happens in the purpose and meaning of his life.
Right. And this general crisis of truth, let's get our terms straight then. For the rest of these programs, we are going to deal with these metaphysical truths, which they are the truths that make men free, as you said to me one time, whereas chemistry and physics might free us from labor, but we want to be free as human persons. And the crisis lies just in these great truths.
That's right. In other words, the scientific truths make life convenient, but they don't give life the spiritual meaning. Why is man created? Where does he come from? What's his destiny? They don't give the meaning to such topics as what is love, of God, of neighbor? What is the relationship? Why should I be loyal? Why should I tell the truth? Why should I have noble ideals? In other words, they don't handle the mysterious aspects of truth. Mysterious in the sense that we can always learn more about them but never exhaust them in our discussions.
And when we speak of the crisis of this kind of truth, we are referring to a general malaise of the world, but you want to focus more specifically on the crisis of the truth about God. That's where the whole center of our discussion will take place. Is that not so?
Exactly. The keystone truth is if man denies his relationship to the being who is truth itself, then of course he becomes disoriented spiritually and he has to create his own truth. Well, now when different men disagreeing with one another create their own truths, you've got a sort of a Tower of Babel situation, social Tower of Babel. Each one speaking a different tongue, each one's going his own way, and each one competing fiercely with the other. System is against system. There's no unity or harmony, since one is not referred, no system is referred back to the source of truth. Remember, truth is personal, not merely an objective thing. It comes out of the absolute source of truth is tri-personal, at least we Catholics say, from theology and revelation. However, we know metaphysically that some absolute supreme intelligence has to explain the beauty, the order, the goodness that we see in the universe, which we know man has not been the author.
And if we try to pass judgment on the 20th century, recognizing, of course, that there are isolated pockets of difference, but in general, would you characterize this as an age of intellectual darkness?
Oh, I would say definitely. If you notice, people are not interested in truth. They're interested in pleasant slogans, things that justify their way of life. This is a form of propaganda. See, they like to hear, for example, that there's nothing wrong with not believing in God. One can fall back on the brilliance of his own intelligence to put meaning in life. There's nothing wrong with, for example, exercising your will to get whatever you like in life, even if it may, for example, impinge on the rights of your fellow man. So what people want today is propaganda which is well lauded with pleasant slogans as plausible explanations of the type of life they're living. And the type of life they're living is divorced from God. Otherwise, how explain the general collapse of societies in family life, in political life, even in church life.
And you don't think these institutions, by and large, live by the rule of truth? Is there some substitute for truth?
No. What will happen is this: the only substitute, since man is capable, has an infinite capacity for self-deception, he's metaphysically hungry for truth. And if he will not take the objective truth before his reason, and before, which is granted him by revelation, he's still hungry for truth, and he will create his own truth and call that the absolute truth, attempt to share it with others, even impose it on others, get them to agree with him, see.
And I've heard you remark, we were discussing before the show, you were saying that the principle of utility dominates our social institutions, not truth, not justice, but utility.
Yes, if you're living in an age, as we mentioned earlier, in which the individual is the center. One is out for his own pleasure, one is out for one's own convenience, one is out for one's own advancement in life, maybe money, a higher position, prestige. Then what happens is the old statement, which is very, very crass and almost, I call it a philosophical sacrilege. William James's statement that truth is the cash value of an idea. So people then just take truth to be whatever succeeds in their lives, see.
No matter how absurd it really is.
No matter how absurd it really is. This is what gets them ahead, what gets them a better salary. In other words, when you're self-centered, then of course, you're going to have to decide what is true, what is morally good, and the only criterion you have is this convenient to me? Does this advance me? Does this help my way of life?
And supposing an earnest student came up to you and he is buffeted by all of these contradictory theories about anything you name, and he said, Father Miceli, is there some objective criterion of truth? How would you answer him?
Well, Bill, I would have to say to the fella, how do you feel when someone tells you a lie? We all feel that we've been had, someone took us when our psychological guard was down. We expected someone to tell us the truth, and we trusted him. Our psychological guard was down, and suddenly we found out later, this man lied to me. In other words, he took advantage of my trust. Now, why am I so angry when that injustice is done to me? Because I know that if this person is a friend, he should have shared truth with me. Truth is social. It's nobody's particular private oyster. We're all made for truth. And we're made to share it with one another. Besides being individual and personal, it's also social. In other words, it makes all of us free. So the whole purpose of conversation, of communication, is to share truth with one another. And we all get angry, whether we believe in God or not, when someone lies to us.
And you would say that the corrosion of truth affects our ethical questions, even our aesthetic questions. I think that there's a great chaos when it comes to what is even beautiful. But would you say it also has affected religion in the Bible?
Yes. First of all, in that first part of your question, your code of conduct will depend on your metaphysical convictions or truth. If you, for example, are convinced of lies as truth, then your code of conduct, which is nothing else but the prolongation of your metaphysical convictions, your morality will be adjusted to this untruth, and hence your morality will be a free and easy morality. Now, the second part of your question, has this spread of disease, of loss of taste for truth, flowed over into revelation? Yes, especially in the Bible. Many people today say, I can interpret the Bible the way I want. All of it is myth, story, so that the Bible today has been given so many meanings, many of them absolutely contradictory to the obvious meaning which each little section has. So that some people get so disgusted with the Bible, they say, it has no meaning at all now. You can take what you want out of it. So you see, revelation then becomes the private oyster of each particular person who wants to interpret it according to the type of life he's leading.
You know, and that depresses me too, because we always refer to the Bible as the Word of God, and many Protestant denominations would insist it is the only access we have to God, and most of us would pick up the Bible and get the obvious meaning, as you said, the wonderful truths about God, the Trinity, good, evil, and grace. But when you hear a discussion today about the Bible, it seems as if nobody, after these people have studied Latin, Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, and after 25 years, they end up wondering, did Christ exist? Does God exist? Is there good? Is there evil? It's a bitter commentary, really, on our confusion when it comes to religious truth.
Exactly, but it all logically follows once you cancel out the existence of God. Because the whole thing, if he's the author of the Bible, and now the author is the non-existent, then, of course, the different books of the Bible become the work of this particular prophet or that particular prophet. This one had this particular literary genius, that one had the other one. This one was telling a story, another one was telling a parable, and it all means whatever you want it to mean, see?
And of course, all of them were culturally conditioned. That's what we're always hearing.
Absolutely culturally conditioned by their times, and therefore today we should update the Bible to fit the trends of our times, which means get whatever meaning out of the Bible that'll agree with what the majority of people here are saying. And once again, that brings in the idea that truth now has become a democratic thing. The very idea of democratic truth is a contradiction in terms.
Yes, we want to know, is something so, and we vote on it, which is rather absurd when you think of it.
Of course. Can you imagine in my class, for example, if I'm giving, let's say, a test on anatomy, and the majority of the students come up and put the heart in the wrong place. And I say, well, more than 50% of the students have put the heart in the wrong place, so I guess the heart must be over in this particular section of the body, somewhere near the shoulder or so, instead of in the breast. Well, can you imagine what would happen to those people if they become doctors and they're operating for the heart somewhere up in the shoulder? I have to be intolerant of error, even as I'm tolerant of the person. I have to call him up and say, if he's, let's say, a student of architecture, all your rules for building bridges are wrong. If I let you build a bridge, every car that goes over it, or the ones that go over it, are going to go down into the river. So you get an F for you fail in the subject. I'm intolerant of the error. The truth is one thing, everything contradictory is error. You get an F for your effort. Now, let's talk as person, a man. Should you stay in this subject, or do your talents lie elsewhere? I'll be tolerant of the person, but intolerant of the error. I have to be. Right. Otherwise, I'll turn loose an incompetent on society, and terrible damage can be done.
And it's bad enough if we have falling bridges and medical doctors who can't find the heart.
That's right.
But when you have the average person who has a few years on earth, if he can't find God, if he can't find a rule for good and evil, I should think his life is a total failure.
Well, the whole purpose of his existence is in danger. As Christ said, what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world? He might be really an economic genius and giant, but that's not the important thing about human life. The important thing about human life is to get communion with God in truth and goodness, holiness. And if that particular goal is completely frustrated, then the whole life of a man has been a failure. No matter how much success he's had in other fields, economic, dramatic, professional, this is not the main thing, the main purpose of our existence.
You know, and I've often been impressed by that. I've been teaching philosophy for 23 years now in college, and I've been impressed by the spirit and the atmosphere of the students, to the extent that there's a twilight of truth, to the extent that one no longer is sure about the important things. I think I find verified the words of Whittaker Chambers. He said in such an ironic, tragic way, the 20th century man has nothing to live for and nothing to die for, that we have sapped the zest of life when we have sapped the metaphysical and religious foundations on which life should be lived.
And Gabriel Marcel, a philosopher who was converted to Catholicism, has the fact that if one is not living for truth, his life becomes, no matter how successful it is otherwise, becomes monotonous, dull. It moves toward the displacement of his personality, since we find our mature persons, in the absolute thou, God, who is truth itself. And he says it moves to a monotonous type of despair, so that one, even if he doesn't commit physical suicide, already commits psychological suicide. He doesn't realize what he's made for, and he drifts. And if you'll notice, the other day the New York papers had an amazing figure. There was a meeting held in the Hilton Hotel in New York on why so many suicides. 35,000 young people committed suicide last year in the United States.
Right, and there are people who should have the great promise of the future. Father Miceli, we're going to talk a little bit about atheism, quite a bit about atheism. And it used to be you always had the village atheist, that you had a village of churchgoers, and standing in the square is this man scoffing at us. But it seems to me, from what I've read and what I've heard, that this village atheist has gone to school. Would you comment on that?
Yes, the village atheist, you might say, was the fellow that was reading Voltaire and liked to be up to date and liked to consider himself too sophisticated to believe in God or the Scripture. Now, he tended to be an isolated type. And therefore, the majority of people didn't want to be known as atheists, because that would be considered, in a religious context, a society that was totally, more or less Christian, that would be considered a terrible downgrading of your personality, and you might not get a job, you might lose a standing in society. But now the village atheist has gone to college. And, as a matter of fact, the academy now produces the most sophisticated atheists, atheistic professors, who analyze, make fun of religion, spread atheism surreptitiously to their students, showing them, well, now you've come of age, your brilliant intellect will not believe, something like Boltman said, the scientific mentality simply can't believe in the stories of Scripture. You know, and of course St. Paul said, the Word of God is not bound, so you got a contradiction there. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, the Word of God isn't bound. It does make converts of scientific people. But anyway, you now have broadened atheism. Atheism has cultured the academy. It's cultured the arts. It's cultured political life. And then along you have a person coming along like Marx who puts atheism in economic life. The exploitation of the masses has been done by the powers of capitalism in league with the powers of the church. And so a war is declared on theism. And so atheism has gone political and military today. And now you have a society which is rapidly growing in atheism. It's an organized type of atheism. And this slow process has been going on over the last 100 years. The Enlightenment started it. but it was picked up quickly after that. The French Revolution put in, for example, the political push. Luther, who broke away from the church, put in the religious revolt. The Enlightenment put in the thrust of doubt by idolizing the intellect, making it its own source of truth. Then along comes Marx, who brought it down to earth. He said, Feuerbach has shown us how to disprove God's existence. It's up to us now to make that truth live in the hearts of every working man. So Marx practicalized atheism by putting it in an ideology and incarnating it in a party, a political party, which has become not only an ideological party, but also a party of politics and a party of military might.
Would you say Marx is the most important academic atheist, or is there still another philosopher still more violent in his denunciation of God?
Marx is by no means the most important academic philosopher of atheism. As a matter of fact, Marx admits, I never have succeeded in disproving the existence of God because Feuerbach did that for me. And all I'm doing is making atheists practical. Ahead of both of them is Nietzsche, the great 19th century German philosopher, who really is the one who warned us that we were going on to create an atheistic society. And he was a real, true prophet. And really, he's the one who foresaw what was happening. And mind you now, Nietzsche comes out of a very religious family. His uncles and he himself was sent to college to be a Protestant divine. And he was something like Feuerbach, who said that I have theologian's blood in my veins. Now Nietzsche, through his teachers and his philosophy, turned against Christianity, and he's the one that said, why, this society I live in, which is trying to push rotted out Christianity, is already atheistic.
Would you have a quote from Nietzsche? I think it's a highly frightening quote.
Yes, I do have a quote from Nietzsche, which comes out of his joyful wisdom. And there is a frightening quote. I'll just read it here for you. Where is God gone? He called out. This is a madman in the piazza or the city square. And this is a madman moving in there with a lantern in his hand, and Nietzsche is a great dramatic writer. Where is God gone? He called out. I mean to tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. But how have we done it? How were we able to drink up the sea? Whither do we move? Do we not stray as through infinite nothingness? God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we console ourselves? The most murderous of all murderers. Is not the magnitude of this deed too great for us? Shall we not ourselves have to become gods, merely to seem worthy of it? There never was a greater event, and on account of it, all who are born after us belong to a higher history than any history hitherto. That's Nietzsche.
It's a chilling point, and of course, here he shows us how the wheel has gone full circle, that we began with the isolated village atheist. He went to college, went to the university, entered politics, entered economics, entered literature, entered culture, until right now, in a sense, we have a global atheism. The world is a village, and every or many people in the village are atheists.
I would say that atheism has now even infiltrated the Catholic Church, because there are many intellectuals who do not want to be known as Catholic, that is to say, followers of Christ, but would rather be known as intellectuals in whom reason is supreme, which is a way of saying that, look, you don't have to believe all these revelations and miracles and whatnot. Reason is sufficient unto itself, and it's a God complex. One is now making his own religion, his own scriptures, his own explanation of Christ, his own explanation of man's existence on earth. See? So that's what's happening today.
If you surveyed the world today, would you say that there's any sort of a lineup? What are the great divisions among the world today?
The great divisions among the world today are the Christian camp on one side and the atheist camp on the other. There is no two ways. There's a showdown coming up, and the third world is caught in between. Both sides are trying to win over the third world. In other words, get global allegiance of the world for its creed, the creed of Christianity, or the creed of Marx, the creed of atheism, which of course would usher in the city of the Antichrist, the final showdown between religion and God's enemies, namely the Antichrist, incarnated in history, see.
And in other words, therefore, it's not a quarrel of economic system, of merely how you produce goods this way or that way. It's a much deeper quarrel.
Of course, what happens is the atheism is always justified through the different strata of man's society, economic, social, political. It's always got to, ideas have consequences, and they have consequences in every dimension of man's life, see. We can't keep our ideas out of our personalities. They are incarnated in our business, in our entertainment, in our families, in everything that we do. These ideas spread right through because they're all alive. So the result is you can't just take an isolated theme and try to make that the purpose of religion or the purpose of the understanding of religion, see. Now, I would like to say about the program that if our listeners find that this program is of timely importance, if they're anxious to really have it continue, why it would be a good idea if they let us know. Let us know about their enthusiasms or even about their gripes. After all, it's possible that we have jarred you a bit about truth. Truth is one of those things that divides people. Either people love it or people don't like it. We still like to hear from you. And you could write to Drama of Truth Incorporated, Box 4113, Dearborn, Michigan 48126. Already we have had some critiques. For example, two distinguished Jesuits, on hearing of the program, wrote in to me. One of them, Father Virgil Bloom, president of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, sent this message, and I quote, "Never in history has there been a more dire need for such a TV program in our troubled era," close quotes. Finally, Father Morton Hill, director of Morality and Media Rights, quotes, "Since the golden days of Bishop J. Sheehan, there has been an arid wasteland of leadership of a spiritual caliber on TV. We hope to be able to fulfill that wasteland by competent discussion." We hope that, Bill, you'll be able to contribute to that as you have today.
How is atheism possible?
Welcome once again to our program, Drama of Truth, which is treating of the general subject, Adventures in Atheism. The theme of today's program will be, how is atheism possible? But before we get into the particulars of that, I would ask Professor Bill Marra to give a summary of our first program, namely which dealt with the anatomy of atheism. Bill?
Well, Father, we had the general background of what we could call the intellectual twilight of the modern world. There's a kind of intellectual darkness everywhere enshrouding us. One of its basic ingredients is the corrosion of truth, that people don't simply believe in anything as true. They rather adopt all sorts of substitutes for truth. And we said that this was especially the case when it came to the most sublime truth, God's existence. So that this atheism, therefore, is the background of our talk. We noted that the atheism has graduated. It used to be we had the village atheist, but such a person has gone to school, he's gone to the university, and now atheism is highly sophisticated, highly respectable. It permeates the culture. It is in economics, in military forces, in government, in every aspect of life. And finally, we noted that in this twilight of darkness, in this rise of sophisticated atheism, the world is assembling itself into two camps. And it's not the camp of black and white, male or female. These are superficial differences. It is rather the camp of those who believe in God and those who don't believe in God. And you summed it up with the practical names, the camp of the Christians and the camp of the atheists. Well, so much then for last time. Today our topic is to look at this camp of the atheists and to ask ourselves just how come atheism is possible in the first place. So would you mind elaborating on that?
Yes, atheism is quite possible if you consider the circumstances in which man lives. First of all, he never has direct vision of God. God is invisible to him. But he does have direct vision, and also his five senses grasp with great joy the beautiful cosmos that God has created, the earth, the stars, the moon. So therefore he's fascinated with creation, which he drinks in with his five senses. Naturally, this should lead him to the marvelous creator of all this beauty, and of all this order and harmony, this music of the spheres, as Dante used to call it. However, he was seduced into sin by Satan, so that now, in his own physical and metaphysical nature, there is a deep cleavage, a schizophrenic break, so that his lower nature, his sensual nature, rebels against his intellectual nature or spiritual nature. And therefore, whereas his mind and intellect pull him towards God, his senses pull him down towards the creature. And hence St. Paul speaks of that divided will in man, whereby he sees the good he ought to do, but he doesn't do it. He does the evil. This divided will is the lower nature. Again, besides that, there is a mystery of free will. You know, even Satan and the bad angels did not have a divided nature, but they had a free will. They fell in love with their own beauty, and the mystery of why they decided freely to reject God and accept themselves, so that Satan said, I will rise above the throne of God, I will establish myself as God. Man has the free will also to say no to God and yes to himself. St. Paul tells us we should be like Christ, saying always yes to God and no to ourselves where it is a conflict with what God wants. So then we have that particular situation. Then as a result of sin, we have the other very, very grave mystery, and it's this: the existence of moral and physical evil which attacks innocent beings like little children. Why does God allow little children to be massacred in wars under terrible napalm bombs? Why does God allow diseases to take possession of little innocent children and wipe them out? Albert Camus, the great philosopher, that was his problem. He witnessed a child who was run over one day, and the poor parents, and a big crowd was around the dead body, and the poor parents were weeping their hearts out. And Camus turned, it was a beautiful summer day in Algeria, he turned and raised his fist to God. He said, how can you be a good God and allow this? And that was the ground for his atheism. So once again, the mystery of God's providence and the mystery of why each particular atheist who decides to be an atheist, what his motive is. We don't know the last motive in each atheist's decision. God alone knows it, because it deals with the inner conscience of a man. So there you have some of the indications as to how atheism is possible in this life.
Our task now is to try to clarify different kinds of atheism, and when we were talking before the show, I think we agreed that we ought to begin with a strange type of creature, what you call the Atheist of Convenience.
Yes, the Atheist of Convenience, or another name for him is the practical atheist. He still believes in God. The minute he would get sick and would be on a serious sickness in his bed, and with doctors around him, he'd be praying with great enthusiasm to God. In other words, he has not lost belief in the existence and goodness of God, but he just ignores it. He lives as if God does not exist because of some particular attraction he has, pleasure, or money, or power. In other words, he doesn't deny the moral law of God either. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but as long as he's in good health and things are going along fine, he wants to live as if God does not exist. In other words, he's the practical atheist. He's the one that, for him, the rebellion is not so much against God as against the fact that he's called to live a life of discipline.
And this would be, I think this is a great scandal, as you say, to the theoretical atheist, because here you have perhaps the majority of people who say God, God, every so often, at least if they're in a foxhole or if there's a war on or if they're unemployed, but then the rest of their life they're just sleepily dreaming or waltzing through life, and this probably bugs the real atheist. Wouldn't you say that?
It certainly does. It's a stone of scandal to the real atheist. And not only that, it gives the real atheist a justification for being an atheist. It isn't a valid justification, but he uses it as if it were. For example, A Christian who's constantly saying he's a Christian and then living like a pagan, he's a stone of scandal to his fellow men. And they say, if that's all Christianity can do for a person is make a phony out of him, then who wants Christianity? There can't be any God. See? So this is it's a psychological excuse if someone wants to break to God to point to the bad Christian. But where the dishonesty in this lies is this. Millions and millions of saints and martyrs throughout the ages have given testimony and witness to the goodness and holiness of God by dying and living very good lives. And the atheist who's attempting to justify himself by looking at the bad Christian or the bad theist is only using selective evidence. The evidence for God's existence among the saints and the martyrs and the good people who live hidden lives of virtue in Christ is mountainous high. Why does he avoid using that to fill out the picture?
Very good. Now, let's get to the word atheism itself, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what, strictly speaking, makes a man an atheist. Would you discuss that?
Yes, well, if you take the word atheism or atheist, it comes from the Greek, etymologically from the Greek a, which is the negative, and theos. Theos is God. Atheos is to be without God, to have no God. So that etymologically, atheism means a man who has no God, who denies there is a God. But of course, an etymological atheist can just be playing a game, a verbal game. He isn't really the sincere, deep atheist. Many people play the verbal games simply because they don't want to publicly commit themselves. If someone says to a person, "Are you a Christian?" and the person might say, "Well, I am in my own fashion, my own understanding of the word." See, but he won't come out and give a specific, succinct, coherent definition of being a Christian because he doesn't want to be known that way. And so many atheists, verbal atheists, are not really atheists, they're practical atheists. However, one may not take a neutral position to God. If being abhors a vacuum, intellectual being, a being with reason and free will, abhors the vacuum of an absolutely intelligent being that is good. And so when someone says he's an agnostic, are you an atheist? Do you believe in God? I don't know. Agnostic. From agnosko, again the A, which is negative, and nosko, I do not know whether there's a God or not. That's a pose. It's a philosophical pose. The person doesn't want to confess publicly that he is an atheist, so he says, I don't know. Really, Christ unveiled that pose, phony pose, when he said, either you're with me or against me. You cannot serve God and mammon. You either love one or hate the other. So to play the game, I don't know, you may fool your fellow man, but you don't fool God. One who says, I don't know whether there is a God, psychologically is denying God.
Now, getting back to the word itself, if the word atheist means no God, well then if I have several different understandings of God, I therefore have several different understandings of atheism, right?
Yes. For example, take the pagans. They believed in many gods. Therefore, they were polytheists. But now take good old Socrates among the Greeks. He came along, and although he practiced the different religious rites in honor of the many gods, still interiorly he did not believe there were many gods. From philosophy and deep reflection, and I suppose a certain amount of prayer, Socrates came to the conclusion that God is one absolutely good being, that all these myriad gods are nothing else but men written large and performing immoral and great deeds as if they were gods but were just gigantic, titanic men. Well, when Socrates started teaching this to youth in his dialogues, immediately the state called Socrates an atheist. Because in relationship to polytheism, which he didn't believe in, he was an atheist.
Right.
But in relationship to the true absolute good being, intelligent being that he did believe in, he was a theist. However, the state put him to death for the crime of, notice the crime of atheism and of corroding the morals of youth. At least the Grecian state realized this, that depending on what your belief in God is, your morals will have to be consistent with that. Since Socrates said, there's only one absolutely true God, you may not go along with the pagan morality of polytheism. You have to have a strict moral discipline, which he lived by. However, they used that as a legal crime against him, against the state, and he willingly went to death as a martyr to uphold the fact that God is one and absolute, and that his moral laws must be kept even at the expense of fighting the state and dying at the state's hands.
So therefore, that's a good thing to keep in mind, that the mere word could be ambiguous just because we sometimes don't know against which God a given person is fighting. But I think in the 20th century we have a pretty good idea of what we mean by the typical atheist today, because he's precisely against the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, the God of Christianity. He is against this transcendent, eternal God whom we adore and who made us. But now let's say that we have a lot of this type of atheist today, this man who rejects biblical Christianity and the God of biblical Judaism, in other words, theism as understood by the Jews and the Christians. Does this man manage to live his life totally without God? Isn't there some sort of a spiritual vacuum left in this person?
Well, every man wants to give meaning to his life. Therefore, he's going to have to create a project, something he wants to be. This is going to be, I'm going to be the best artist, or the best musician, or maybe the best sportsman, some meaning for living. Now, in the case of some transcendent ideal, therefore in the case of the one who denies God, the true God, as a transcendent ideal, and does not substitute anything in its place for which he will give all his powers and energies, to which he will give them, then he has a vacuum there of an ideal to work for. If he stays in that vacuum logically, because man is not logical, logically he should commit suicide because life is absurd for him. It's a tale told by an idiot. But most men don't do that. Having gotten rid of the true God, the true ideal, they then substitute an ideal of their own for which they will give their whole life and energy and project. For example, getting rid of the true God, Nietzsche substituted Superman as God. And he gave his whole life to that, writing books, working hard, ruining his health over it. Karl Marx, getting rid of the true God, substitute the classless society. And that's what he wrote and studied in the English libraries for, and got sick and whatnot, and traveled around the world to create revolutions. Feuerbach, who got rid of the true God, who said he had theological blood in his veins, substituted abstract humanity. Auguste Comte, the great founder of sociology, substituted the God of science, the God of sociological humanity. So you go down the line. Now, these are really gigantic gods of high quality.
And that's why they work, because one feels as if there's something bigger than oneself, that I'm not simply living for myself, but there's a goal transcending me. So that's a rather effective substitute for God.
It's an excellent, effective substitute. Just look at the results, how these people have moved millions of masses with their ideal.
Right, they have idealism, they are willing to die for the truth and so on. But instead of always thinking big, would you say there are any midget substitutes for God, something down to our level, for example?
Oh, yes, there are many people who are not the great intellectual giants of Nietzsche, Karl Marx, Albert Camus, or you name them, the great modern philosophers or death of God theologians. There are many people who get rid of the true God, but they substitute pygmy gods for themselves. For example, the Jewish people, when they came out of Egypt and got into the desert, and Moses was up praying to God, and they were having a little rough time of it, they immediately said, why, we ate much better when we were in Egypt. St. Paul talks about those people whose God is their belly, pleasure, food. So what did the Jewish people do? They created the god of the golden calf. They all put in their precious rings and earrings and whatnot, and Aaron was forced to make a god of a golden calf, and they all fell down before that god and said, please give us better food and a better life than in this desert. Forgot the true God. Well, today, people create their own gods. Let's say in the realm of sex, they fall down before the golden blonde or the golden woman. In the realm of power, they fall down before getting political power. In the realm of money, they fall down to the god of riches. In the realm of notoriety, they will fall down to the god of fame. These are pygmy mini-gods. We call them petty gods. Nonetheless, men, because of their love of them, will give their whole beings to them, their whole lives.
They're probably not with any kind of vigor or messianic. At least they don't consider this a great cause to live or die for, but I imagine it's a very comfortable God. That's the advantage of golden calf. You see it, you touch it. It's the advantage of golden blondes too.
That's right. And in a sense, since they've lost faith in the true God, it builds up a new superstitious faith. We have need for faith. If we don't have the true God, then that hunger to believe in someone who's all good, superior to us, who can help us in our trials and maybe deliver us from dangers, that still remains. So you have to then go to the underworld powers, spiritual powers, superstition in spirits, devil worship, prestigious actions, all sorts of what they call witchcraft and whatnot. See, because we still have the hunger for the supernatural, the preternatural. It's never taken away from us. It was meant to be satisfied by God Himself, the supernatural, the angelic world, the world of miracles, the world of revelation, of faith. But if it is not satisfied there, men will dig down into the underworld to satisfy it.
Now let's talk about perhaps what we could call the atheist, that if you wanted to give the palm to a super atheist or to someone who really embodies atheism in the strict sense, I don't think that you give that palm to someone who's fooling around with a blonde or golden calf. You want to reserve that for a special type of person. Would you comment on that?
Yes, the special type of person will almost be as spiritual as Satan himself. And therefore you have these great philosophical atheists of the day that I've been mentioning, Feuerbach, Auguste Comte, Kant, Marx, Camus. These people are serious about creating a philosophy of life in which man becomes his own God. And they mean to upgrade man, because they say that the God of Revelation puts shackles on man's project in life. It makes him work for a kingdom hereafter and waste his time on the kingdom here and now. It makes a lazy lout out of him. He's looking for pie in the sky, as Marx puts it, rather than creating his own pie here on now on earth, bettering his social condition, educating himself better, becoming more humane, more intellectual, more educated, less exploited and poor, a cleaner animal in a sense of ecology, everything in perfect order. This gives him a project of remaking the universe.
Therefore, this person is not indifferent to the God of the Bible. In other words, you can't say of this atheist, he simply ignores God.
No, it's even worse than that. This atheist is fighting God. He's so angry with the God of the Bible that he said, "You have made slaves of mankind." Hegel was like this. Hegel was furious at the God of the Bible. He said the God of the Bible created a guilt complex in man, whereas man shouldn't have a guilt complex. His dignity was gone. So in one sense, this atheist has got a good chance of being converted because he takes the God of the Bible seriously and fights him.
Yeah, he's not
furiously.
lukewarm.
He's not lukewarm or neutral. Whereas the fellow that plays that atheism, and now this is the poser, who says, he talks about religion, he talks about God, talks about the church, but it's with ridicule, something like Voltaire. It's an interesting subject to make fun of. He doesn't take God seriously. He's an intellectual snob. He's the type that God specifically despises because he plays at these spiritual sacred notions in order to erode the faith in serious people who believe in God. See? Whereas at least the serious atheist of the type of Marx, who's fighting to destroy the idea of God in everybody's conscience, he realizes the importance of God's existence, the importance of His revelation, and what a strong hold the true God has on the masses of people, at least in their consciences.
Now, perhaps the most famous atheist in this country is Madeline Murray O'Hare. Would you rank her with the super atheists?
Oh, hardly. I had to debate her twice. She really is a propagandist, a popularizer of atheism. She didn't handle the notion. For example, when I said, "What do you mean by atheism?" she said, "Why, every child that comes into existence is born without any idea of God. He's an atheist." I said, "Oh my goodness, every philosopher from Plato right on down to the present day would laugh at that definition of atheism. One has to reach a certain adulthood to be an atheist." Just like I said, one is not born a Democrat or a Republican. One has to know what these titles mean. It takes a certain maturity, awakening of the intelligence. So she really doesn't know what atheism is. I think she's propagandizing, and she loves the notoriety that goes with this particular project of hers.
And yet she is one of the transmission belts whereby we have translated this academic idea of atheism. We've let it percolate down into the society, into the schools, into the law.
Well, she has used the legal media to get decisions made by the Supreme Court which penalize the presence of God in public life. She wants to now take God off the coins. She got him out of school prayer, which was a tradition, by the way, by our early fathers in our schools. There was nothing foisted. It was a prayer that was common to all, common belief to all. She succeeded in secularizing educational life. She'd like to secularize economic life. She'd like to secularize the media. A program such like this that we're having, she'd like to have it banned from the air.
Now, that's interesting. This would, and probably then, no one would shout censorship. That this
it shows you how intolerant some atheists are.
Yeah. We speak sometimes, we have the Catholic religion, the Lutheran religion, and so on. Is there such a thing as the religion of atheism?
Certainly there's a religion of atheism. How can you explain the enthusiasm with which Marxists line up to visit the shrine of Lenin? Long lines. He's their relic. He's their idol. There's a regular ritual. Marxism has imitated the Catholic Church in its ritual, except that humanity is God. And so Lenin and Stalin and the great heroes, the saints, they are put in special mausoleums, and millions of people line up and visit them and give them sacred homage. This is a liturgical religion. Not only that, but the messianic enthusiasm with which they make converts. They go out, and no Marxist who is not attempting to undermine the faith of a Christian is worthy of the salt of existence. He will be brought to task because he's not using the enthusiasm of his Marxist faith to undermine Christian faith, to destroy Christianity. He'll be brought to task on that by the leaders. And so you have a pope, the party. You have cardinals, all the top echelons of it. These people are part of the church of Marxism. It hates Christianity and the church founded by Christ. Why? It's out to destroy Christ and his church. How better destroy it by having a perfect substitute for it that people can give their lives to with a certain idealism to it. You know, even Auguste Comte had the Church of Sacred Humanity. With him, the high priest was scientist, and they used to check out whether the believer was actually living the life, and if he wasn't, he was punished by being removed from economic advantages. This is Auguste Comte, the great founder of sociocracy, in which the state is a religion and sociology and science are the doctrines there.
And it seems that even though many religions are in a crisis, unfortunately this religion of atheism seems to be making converts every day.
Well, it's again psychologically reasonable. If you have to substitute for God, when you get rid of your God, if you're going to have a project in life which transcends your own individual personality and puts your wonderful powers, creative powers to work, then you're also going to have a relationship to that God. What else is religion but religio is your binding relationship to the God that you believe in. So, these atheists who have substituted a God now have to have policies towards that God, a ritual towards Him, a communication with Him, prayers, feast days, heroes, saints, and devils, of course.
And they've got to have an educational system passing on the faith to the hapless children, too.
Oh, exactly. They will attempt to get up the communications media, write books. They write magnificent books. They travel around the world giving conferences and lectures. All of this to convince people to be like they are, atheists of a certain brand or type. So I think in talking to our audience, I hope if you have enjoyed the program so far, you make yourself quite valuable if you have to, in letting us know what you like and what you dislike about it. Bill, do you have anything to say on that?
No, except to say that this religion of atheism, translated into American terms, means secular humanism. It's a nice title, but it really is passing on the catechism of atheism, of Marx and so on, to the children.
I agree completely.